What's up, everybody? It's Alex from Heavy New York, and on the phone we got Alec from Lesser Glow. Thank you so much for your time today, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yep. It's so awesome to have you here. You have the new album, Nullity, coming out on May 29th. Do you just want to talk about how the making of this record was? Is this just a follow-up to Ruined, or is this sort of like a new beginning for Lesser Glow in a way?
Well, a couple of the songs as we're writing sort of overlapped. Like around the time we were sort of finishing up recording Ruined, we're working on a song. Actually, The Great Imitator was the first track, on the record. It was also the first one he wrote for the record. So, we actually, when we were doing the live videos for the last record, we recorded a couple demos in the studio of this and another song that never made the cut. So we're like, we got microphones set up, we might as well demo a couple new songs. So yeah, and then those ended up on the record. So,
aren't you always worried like the song you leave out will be a B-side one day to be the biggest hit you guys ever had?
Well, that one we tried ripping apart in probably 5 different ways, and it never really came together. So I don't know if that one will ever see the light of day.
Yeah,
but who knows?
Well, I've always thought that when I first heard Ruined back in 2018, I've always said that like Lesser Glow has like a lot of experimental elements behind it. Like even with this new album, like I thought like The Great Imitator was very different from a song like Alone in the Column or like The Great Filter or something like that. Is it fair to say that you guys like to try new things when making new music, or do you try to maybe have a sound that you want to stick with?
I don't think we necessarily go into songwriting with like a specific sound or vision in mind. It's really, kind of like, say like a skeleton gets introduced by Andrew, or like say if Andrew and Benji are working on a riff together, then things just kind of like happen organically. I think like the direction it goes in, really just all has to do with like, I don't know, wherever we are at the moment personally, or whatever we're listening to at the moment. And, I think that's kind of lends itself to the direction, and it just happens organically. And when we start writing, we kind of know almost immediately if things are working or not. And and if they're not, we'll try things for a couple practices, and if they're not working, then it gets shelved. So, and I think out of these, I guess there's eight songs on the record, and I think there's probably like 4 or 5 others that we tried for a while, and it just never really got anywhere. So
future B-sides maybe?
Who knows? We'll see. Maybe we'll scrap a couple of the riffs, because there's some good ones in there, but not good enough to be a full song.
Yeah. So it's fair to say you kind of in a way just answered this, but there's really no like preconceived idea with writing, right? It just kind of like everything kind of falls into place.
Correct. Yeah. And it's pretty cool with this group of guys. They're all really talented and good at what they do, and we all trust each other to make the right decisions. And say if I wrote a couple songs, I was like, oh, these are great, and then the other guys are like, maybe not so great. So after a while, I'm like, okay, you guys are right, they're not so great.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. One thing I was curious about is there ever a time where maybe like lyrics or maybe a subject matter or a concept could influence on how you guys write the songs in a way?
Yeah. Nullity is a concept record of sorts. That was sort of like just an idea that sort of came to me over the course of a couple of years. Just like dealing with some personal stuff, and then obviously like the current political climate. And while I don't want to be a political band or involved in any sort, it's just really tough not to be affected by it, to have like just so much negativity being thrown at you all the time. So to say that doesn't play into the writing would be a lie. It definitely does.
Yeah.
So
yeah, we're all isolated right now, so I'm saying that this is the best time for creativity.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I've been trying to stay busy with that stuff.
Yeah, you'll have another album out before you know it.
We'll see.
Yeah. Now, being that Lesser Glow has, all your members were involved in other projects, obviously you were in the Proselyte, and, you had Seth who was in Undersea, and then you have members from Black Elm. Like, does your previous bands, like, did that ever influence the sound of Lesser Glow as well, or did you guys want to do something completely like you've never done before?
I don't think Lesser Glow is necessarily like too far removed from what we were doing before, and I think, people's personal sounds are just part of them. It's sort of ingrained in you, so whether or not you reference something else entirely or push to make a certain sound, I feel like whatever you bring to the table will always shine through. So, and I think that's the case with our previous bands, going into this one. But I think the thing that really ends up changing things is experience. I listen to like old music of mine, or like old bands. You ask yourself why you might make those decisions, but I guess that's why you make the decisions, so then you can question them later on.
Yeah, well, you're
make better ones.
Yeah, well, you're always a product of your past, right? It's like
Correct.
It's always a foundation, regardless whether you want it or not. So, like, I'd imagine that sometimes there's stuff that you've done in your previous bands that you're like, oh, well, we could try to squeeze that into a Lesser Glow sound.
Yeah, I don't know if it's necessarily a conscious effort to do so, but yeah, I think it's something that is inevitable.
Yeah. Are you ever worried, like, if you're trying to perfect your sound so much that a Lesser Glow song could sound too much like a Lesser Glow song? Does that ever become a fear of you guys in a way?
No, not necessarily, because I don't think we've never even talked about, like, what genre we want to be, or, we've never really had any sort of expectations that we're trying to live up to. And so, if a song goes in a faster direction, or more like a more hardcore or doom direction, either or, it's just, we never really set out with that certain thing in mind, to try to be something. We're not trying to be anything, I suppose.
Yeah, and I'd imagine that, like, you all take inspiration from different sources as well, which has to influence the experimental qualities of the band, right?
For sure, yeah. I don't know, when I was like kind of writing, lyrically and some of the melodies too, I was listening to a lot of like Scott Walker and definitely stuff like Sumac, and like Yautja. Man, I love that band. They're so good.
Yautja,
yeah, from Nashville.
Yeah. I believe I spoke with them before the outbreak.
Oh yeah, great band, super talented dudes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that definitely had a part of it. I think lyrically speaking, I don't even say if I'm looking for like inspiration, or like a little creative push, that I will hardly ever reference something heavy. And it's always, I look up to lyricists and songwriters like Leonard Cohen or Nick Cave, and Scott Walker again is another one too. He was a huge influence on me. So love his music.
Yeah. Do you need music before you come up with lyrics though? Is it?
No, not necessarily. Sometimes like if we're working on a song and like a melody or rhythm comes to mind, sometimes it's like do like a marbled mouth melody, and sometimes the lyrics will sort of take shape based on whatever gibberish came out of my mouth. So, and then that'll be like a jumping off point, and then things will develop from there.
Yeah. Do you try to leave lyrics open to interpretation, or like do you try to maybe engage the listener into what you're singing about?
I suppose it really depends on the subject matter. I think you can get personal to the point that it can be awkward, and I think when you get to those types of areas, it's better to sort of step away a little bit and remove yourself and leave it up to interpretation. Because if like fundamentally these like vulnerable emotions or whatever are things that sorry, my dog's barking here.
It's fine. I live by 5 hospitals. I think I outdid you on the whole background noise thing.
Where was I? What was I just talking about?
Lyrics being open to interpretation.
Oh yeah, okay. So I think on a fundamental level, everybody kind of experiences the same sort of emotions, and and you can sort of put things in that general area, and people can interpret it however they must. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Do you find it easier to come up with ideas for the songs when you're in the company of your other bandmates, or do you, being that isolation is like the greatest fuel for creativity, that maybe you prefer to be alone?
Yeah, I've always done like lyrics and vocals kind of on my own. There's been a few sessions, like vocal sessions, where some of the band members will be around, but I work in a studio for a living, make records and stuff, so a lot of the time, like, I'll just kind of go in and at an odd hour and just get a bunch of stuff done on my own,
Does working in a studio where you're working with other bands and other musicians influence you at all as well?
Oh, for sure, yeah. There's some really great bands in and around Boston, so I would definitely think that some of the talent rubs off, and they'll definitely get pushed in a certain direction from one band or another.
Yeah,
No doubt. Yeah.
I feel like Boston is one of the greatest scenes in American music. Period. Like,
some legends coming out of the city. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
yeah, I'm not too fond in New York. I'm not too fond of your baseball teams, but your band's top notch.
Well, I grew up in upstate New York, so I'm kind of in a weird gray area.
Okay.
In that sense.
Yeah. So us, the Yankees and the Red Sox equally hate both of you. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
But is there, like, I'd imagine the current scene in Boston has to, I mean, obviously, thanks to a certain virus that shall not be named, there's no active scene at the moment. But I'd imagine that Boston, with the history of the metalcore movement and the hardcore movement and everything like that, that Boston still has a very thriving scene at the moment, right?
Yes and no. There's a lot of really great bands, and I think the certain, I get that there's certain like ebbs and flows as to like types of bands that are coming in and out of the scene. But I think part of the problem in Boston, and I think this is probably the case for a lot of different cities, is that like gentrification is sort of pushing a lot of artists out, and venues are starting to disappear. Like our beloved Great Scott just closed, which is awful, and I'm sure it'll probably become a condo or a bank or something or other. But yeah, there's fewer and fewer places to play these days, so we're gonna have to start getting creative.
Yeah.
Because a few years ago there used to be like a really strong like DIY scene and basement shows, and there just doesn't seem to be as many places anymore. I mean, that now could be because I'm in my 30s, and when I was going to these shows, I was in my 20s or in college, and so I might just be the old guy in the scene now. So they might exist, but I don't know. But the cops did at one point crack down really hard on a lot of these DIY venues and shut them down, unfortunately. So
yeah. Well, first off, as Lemmy said, if you think you're too old to rock and roll, that means you probably are. And but I mean that's just the cycle of a scene in a city in general, though, right? Like venues close and new ones open. Like isn't that just the natural cycle of life? Like here in New York City, which is the art capital of the world, I've heard so many stories about galleries closing, but I mean there's so many galleries opening up, and it's still considered the art capital of the world.
Right.
So, I mean, is there any new venues like that are currently opening up in Boston that are like super like into the movement and everything?
Well, no. Once Ballroom in Somerville has been doing a lot of the heavier shows, and there's two different rooms there. One of them I think is about 350, 400 cap, and then the upstairs is maybe 100, like closer to O'Brien's size, and there's some really good vibes over there. But other than that, there's not too much that I'm aware of that is doing shows right now outside of like O'Brien's, for like smaller venues.
Yeah. Well, if the Great Scott does become a bank or a coffee shop like you fear, what you should do is you should get to know your quote-unquote enemy. Reach out to the banks. Be like, hey, can we play a show in your bank and maybe give a shout-out to your service? Like if people show up to the show, they'll get like a free, they'll get like a deal on an ATM card or something like that. And
God, making a deal with the devil.
Making a deal with the devil is the most metal thing you can do, though, no?
Oh, God. Yeah, it depends on, I don't know.
Yeah,
ethically speaking, I don't know if you can live with yourself making a profit for these places that are already making a huge profit.
Yeah, sell their debit cards at your merch booth.
Yeah, sorry guys, there's no money on them, they're just cards.
What I just said may either be the best idea or the absolute worst idea in history. So, yeah.
People feel special walking away with something, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. And another thing I was curious about is kind of going into playing live. Is there maybe a similar energy that you channel into your live presence as when Lesser Glow is like rehearsing or songwriting, or is playing live in front of an audience almost like a completely separate art that you have to master in a way?
Well, I think over the years we've gotten better at playing live, but I think, the energy channeled through live shows is definitely what drives us writing. Because I think, say, when we're trying to do something like real heavy, we're trying to push it to be as heavy as it can be. And I think a lot of that is just like the human energy that comes out of playing live, Mm-hmm. So yeah, I would say that they're definitely intertwined as far as the writing and performance side of things.
Yeah, I mean, I'd imagine that you have to like almost like practice crowd interaction in a way, right? Is there a certain art to that you have to master?
No, I don't. At least on my sets. I'm just. That's probably one of the last things on my mind. I feel like I'm terrible at it so far. So, yeah, I don't know if it's necessarily a crowd interaction sort of thing, and I don't know if our music necessarily lends ourselves to being like a let me hear you sort of banter. But yeah.
Yeah. And are you ready for the most difficult question of the whole interview?
Sure.
How do you know when a song is done?
Oh, when we've written an ending for it, I suppose. which is often like the hardest thing to do, because sometimes songs will go too long, and then you have to make some executive decisions and chop some parts off, and I guess it's kind of a feeling thing, So if the song ends up being tedious to play, then you probably know it's too long.
That's a good way of putting it, actually.
Yeah.
Yep. So before we go, I want to thank you so much for your time today. Great to be able to talk to you. Is there just anything else that you would like to promote for the new album, Nullity? It's coming out on May 29th. Is there just, obviously, thanks to a certain virus that, once again, shall not be named. But I'd imagine when all this is over, we can maybe be seeing you guys on the road quite a bit, right?
I would hope so. Yeah, we were planning on getting some touring done, obviously later this year, like late spring and then fall, and obviously those we had to cancel all that stuff, and so who knows when we're really going to be looking at shows again. But I think we're definitely going to try to get some streaming shows going. Once we're able to like be in a place safely, but not still have a crowd. So I think ultimately we're going to just have to basically put a bill together and record it and stream it. So I guess I would be on the lookout for that. Plus, after the record comes out, yeah.
All right. Well, Alec, thank you so much. Everybody, we are here with Alec of Lesser Glow, Nullity, out May 29th. Be sure to pick it up then when supplies last forever, and we will see you next time on Heavy New York.